Now, that is part of the study that ISA had to conduct in regards to the human rights impact of commercialization of public services that is across East Africa. Now, this discussion is form of a launch of that report. And of course, as we continue discussing, we will get to know what the report is talking about, some of the challenges it is going to address, as well as the call to action. And joining me in this discussion, we do have Alana Kembabazi, who is the program manager at the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, that is ISA Uganda. Also joining us from the Uganda Healthcare Federation is the Executive Director, Grace Chiwanuka. And also in our midst, we do have the Honorable Member of Kumi, Honorable Member of Parliament for Kumi Municipality, that is Honorable Aogon Silas. He is also with us. And also we thought it wise to have or to pick a mind of a student and of course a youth human rights activist. And joining us is Nikita Kawesi, who will also be giving us her perspective from, the youth's side. So right about now, allow me welcome my panelists to introduce themselves and also to tell us in what capacity they are here. Good morning to you, Honorable, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and good morning everybody out there. My name's Silas Aogon. I represent the people of Kumi Municipality. I'm on the Committee on Education and Sports in Parliament, but as well as the Park Central.
Okay.
I'm also the chair of the Watch Forum in the Parliament. Okay. And I'm proud to be here with you.
Thank you for coming, Honorable. Yeah. Yes, Alana, good morning to you.
Good morning. My name is Alana Kembabazi with the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. We are running a continental-wide campaign on reclaiming public services in Africa. So health, education, social protection. We work to advance and catalyze more equitable distribution of resources to social and economic rights, because we believe that is a way to combat inequality.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming. Yes, Grace, good morning to you.
Good morning, Audrey. My name is Grace Chiwanuka. I am the Executive Director of Uganda Healthcare Federation. We're an umbrella body for the private health sector, and really our role is to not only advocate for the interests of the private health sector, but to make sure that within our health system, the private sector is well represented and well articulated in terms of its purpose and its goal.
All right, thank you for coming. Yes, Nikta Kawesi.
Hello. I'm Namata Nikta Kawesi. I'm a student and I'm also a human rights activist. Now, my role here is to basically bring a youth voice into how public services, what is the nexus basically linking public services to the youth, and how is it a detriment to us? What's happening in Uganda's context, and where is our voice in everything that is happening?
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for coming. And so let us get straight into the discussion this morning. Now, ISA, that is the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, did carry out a study to which they came up with a report indicating different aspects of human rights impact on commercialization of public services. And I would like us to get into it straight away, starting with Alana Kembabazi. You are the programs manager at ISA Uganda, and you are the people spearheading this study. Give us an overview of the study and also what informed you to carry out this study.
Yeah, in terms of what informed us, it was COVID. We've worked in Uganda's sector for a very long time, and Grace and I have known and worked together for many years on different sides usually of the coin, but I think also very committed to the country as a whole. But what we saw during COVID was that this was happening across the continent, that a pandemic comes, and every African country, that's when it became like we were one country. Okay. We have no basics in the public health facilities. There is exorbitant charging in the private. Some are requiring land titles. And then when you come to education, kids are out of school. There are no viable public education, like good public schools. It's really, we realized that across the continent, we had recognized and reduced access to what are fundamental, their rights, socio-economic rights, health, education, social protection. We had reduced access to that, to someone's ability to pay. And yet Africa is supposed to be at the cusp of really taking advantage of the future. We have the youngest workforce. Okay. We have the youngest group of people. Most of Uganda's population, for example, are young people. But they're not getting public services. What happens in the future? Are you going to be able to be productive and actually have growth? So across the continent, we saw these similarities. Getting to the report itself, we decided to look, first of all, let's look at East Africa, where we are, the Jumia region, right? And there were a couple of things that troubled us. One, of course, there is the high debt. Many of our countries are struggling with rising debt. Uganda's debt doubled just in the pandemic. And now you've been hearing all the time people are shouting about how much debt. But look at Kenya, the protests were there, it was tied to debt and inequality. You continue to Tanzania, they're better than us and Rwanda, but they're still also there. And the impact of that is that most of the money is going to servicing creditors in so many ways, and they're not giving as much money as they should to health. But there's also generally, I think, and I'm glad our honorable is here, a somewhat failure of political will. Because even if you have less, how you cut the cake matters. When you're at home, you want to make sure I have beans in that house. And maybe even portion. You saw how we were in COVID. You make sure you have your beans and portion before you go and begin buying chicken. Yeah. You don't go and buy. Your people fail to have beans, then you give meat to your visitors or others, to your uncles, and say, if I give them meat, they will take care of my family. Are you sure? Are you serious? Your responsibility is to provide for your family, and that is what we are seeing in health, in education. That the government is not investing enough in the public facilities, and then even the little money they have. They get it and begin to give to private in the hope that it will reach to their people. So in Uganda, for example, you know the public-private partnerships we've always had with the Catholic Medical Bureau, for example, or the private, the others, not for profit. And then we also have the Lubowa scenario, where we are now getting the private for profit and saying, let's give them some resources there. And so that's a problem because they're not reaching your people because they have to, they're making profit, they have to make profit. And they detain patients, which we all know. Remember there was so much uproar in Uganda, for example, about the detention. The president was tasked to intervene, and there are court cases. 2 court cases have come out instructing government, you must regulate private actors. There can be no detention, and you must regulate the fees, particularly in the context of a pandemic, where you are at the top of, where someone needs oxygen now, and you're saying, if you don't have this, I won't give you this. But the third trend that I would then see is, in addition to the inadequate financing, and of course the ways in which high debt contributes to that pressure, and the ways in which we have been advised to give money to private facilities, including by the World Bank. The World Bank's economic update for Uganda, the latest, said invest in healthcare, then it pushed for public-private partnerships, which is something Grace and I are going to probably debate, because we do, I'm sure, disagree on it, on a strategy around that. But our understanding as ISA is that you should be able to adequately invest in your public health facilities. And anyone else who comes in, private actors, you must regulate, because you are talking about rights. You are not buying or selling Rolex watches and letting health or education go to the highest bidder. You are talking about rights. So that is, I would say, the summary.
All right, thank you, Alana. So I'd like to bring Grace in, Grace Chiwanuka from the Uganda Healthcare Federation. I'd like to pick your view or your mind on the report that ISA just launched. And as you've heard from her deliberation, they are mostly calling for the need to regulate private actors in social services. What is your take on this?
I think we're talking about something that is not a new conversation. This conversation is not just unique to Uganda. Like Alana said, it's continent-wide. It's actually a global conversation. Because health issues and the provision of services by government is an issue that is happening on every single continent on this globe, particularly after COVID-19. That is the first point. And when I looked at the report, it talks about commercialization. Now, commercialization is the putting of a monetary value on a service.
On a public service.
On a public service. Now, privatization is when you put that monetary value and then you charge a user fee for that service. So we're talking about, when you talk about privatization, commercialization, those are 2 different things. So when we're talking about PPPs, or public-private partnerships in health, and we talk about how do they translate into results in our country, that's yet again another and a deeper rabbit hole that I'm not going to get into. If we focus more on what this report was talking about, which is putting a monetary value on a social service or a public service, such as health, for example. And I know the report talked about education and health, but I'm going to focus on health. And we're talking about the background of COVID-19. Now, COVID-19 was 4 years ago. We've now, since COVID-19 had Ebola, we're now dealing with monkeypox. So we need to not only turn the page from COVID and take those learnings and move forward. We also need to say, what are we moving forward with? And we also need to look at the health system as a whole, not in buckets. We need to appreciate that the private sector plays a complementary role to government, because there's no government in the entire world where government does it all. There's private sector in every single country, even the ones with the most stellar and most efficient health systems. They have the private sector. So if we look at it from that perspective and say, what do we learn from their experience in COVID, our experience in COVID, and since COVID, what have we done to improve the situation? And as the Uganda Healthcare Federation, because it is our role to be the umbrella for the private health sector, our job is to make sure that when COVID-19 happened, and Alana says she and I debate this a lot, when we talk about alleged exorbitant fees charged by the private sector, it's alleged.
I was actually going to bring that up.
Yes.
That the private sector is usually linked with...
Alleged.
Yes.
And the reason I say alleged is because at that time, I personally went and met Parliament. I met the parliamentary committee on this COVID issue. And we asked, can government quantify how much government spends on a COVID-19 patient? Not a complicated case, but a regular run-of-the-mill case, not one with complications, not one with chronic conditions, and it was costing government just around 3.6 million shillings per patient per day for COVID-19. So if they're in the hospital bed for Mulago for 10 days, right, that's 36 million. In a government hospital, but you're not paying, because you're paying in your taxes. You're not feeling it, because when you're being discharged, you're not paying the 36 million. The people paying taxes are paying that 36 million for you. Now, when they come to a private facility, because a lot of people chose to come to the private facilities, and one of the things that I want to underscore is they would come and refuse to be referred to a government facility. They would refuse.
And why is that?
And that's the question. And I don't see, when we were discussing it at the time, I didn't see why that became the fault of the private provider. Because if you look at our constitution, the constitution squarely lays the responsibility of providing health services on the doorstep of government. It does not say that the private sector is responsible for providing health services. It lies at the doorstep of government. The second thing is that private sector investor in health is foregoing putting up apartments, foregoing putting up a mall. They're investing in infrastructure and technology that is availing what is an advanced level of care in Uganda that it may take government some time to provide. And so when we have the conversation of how Uganda Healthcare Federation, we agree it is a human right for people to access health. And we agree there's a responsibility on the private sector to make sure that we offer access. But that responsibility should not squarely lie with the private sector.
Okay, thank you, Grace. Well, the Honorable here will help us to answer. Why is it that people are running away from, the public services, say the government, hospitals and schools, and opting for the, private sector? Allow me just bring in the perspective of the youth, because when Alana was deliberating, she did highlight that the young people in their report are unable to access these services. And lately, Nikta, we've seen social protests in Uganda, Kenya, and of course, with public rising up demanding for accountability of services, quality services. And so how are these social campaigns, likely to, to address or to speak to this campaign that ISA is spearheading?
Okay. How do I say this? Let me start from the point of view that it's simply just expensive for me. I cannot leave home. I cannot move out. Yeah? As young people, we are unemployed. As young people, we are crushed by inflation. We are crushed by food and power shortages. We were the generation that was promised a free education. We were promised free healthcare, and you can even see it from the infrastructure that we have. You can see New Mulago, you can see even the improvements in infrastructure that has been improved in the different government universities. But then what's happening? As I was growing up, we were told that work hard, get good grades, and the job will call and come to you. Well, we've worked hard, we've finished education, we've gotten the good grades, but we're unemployed. Where does that leave us? Yeah? It's quite sad today. Maybe if I could just quickly take you back from history, that where does commercialization of public services come from? For example, initially, just like Grace was saying, is that government has the primary obligation to to convey public services to its citizen. However, because of the demands from the IMF, the World Bank, it was, as a developing country, it was to implement economic reforms that allow for liberalization of markets as well as commercialization of public services. But that did not take away their primary responsibility to give us these public services. Now, while private actors were to supplement on the provision, what's happening today is that there's supplant. What I mean there is that now they are the primary providers of the schools. If you're talking about going to a good school, you're not looking at a government school. If you're talking about getting good health care, you're not talking about a government hospital. It's crazy. I know many of us have even been to the different government hospitals. We've been to Mulago. Even there, you still have to pay. You're getting the same service, but if you want to avoid the lines, this is what you have to do. So coming back to a young person's perspective, I don't have medical insurance. I am unemployed. I have no money. My future is at stake. I cannot even save. Where am I going? Okay. What does this mean for me? Yeah, it's basically a chronic underfunding of public services.
And so what do the young people want?
So what the young people, we want accountability. For example, we pay taxes. Yeah, and these public services is our public right. Yeah, we are not asking for much. Show us that this is actually the budget and this is where the money is going. I have worked on a report for governance and accountability of public primary education, and this is basically to look at what is the governance in regards to government's provision of public education. But we need transparency to know who is doing what and who is being paid, who is not. You'll even be amazed that people like SNCs are P2 dropouts, but are supervising diploma holders or graduates. So what does this mean? We pay this money, but what is it that it's doing? So we want an accountability. Now, going back to the report then, is that we cannot stop the provision of private actors for the schools, but then we need a leveled ground. We need some sort of policy to regulate, because we know that private actors are like, their goal is to profiteer. So for them, it's really profit. Yeah, the highest bidder will take the highest clients, that the best education will come from them. Where is it leaving us? Where is it leaving my mom? We've heard about hospital detentions. Babies have been, a newly born baby has been detained in hospital.
Because of failure.
Because my mom, my mom, all mothers, cannot pay for the hospital. And we saw this during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's crazy. Dead bodies were being detained for this. So where does that leave us?
Okay.
What future am I looking to? Where am I going to work?
Okay. All right. Thank you, Nikta, the voice of the youth. So, Honorable, I'd like to turn to you right about now. ISA, the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights Uganda, did come up with a report, and as you heard from Alana, there were so many issues that they discovered in regards to the human rights impact of commercialization of public services, and some of them include profit-oriented delivery and financing of public services by private actors that is negatively affecting availability and access to quality health and education services in Uganda. And as Nikta has also highlighted, we would like to first of all pick your mind on the report by ISA, and thereafter you can give us some of the concrete steps that government is taking to regulate and ensure that the private sector's involvement aligns with the human rights aspect.
Thank you so much. I think the first thing is for me to appreciate you as a NTV for allowing us to have this space to discuss such a very important matter. It's a human rights issue. Number two, to appreciate my sisters for the wisdom. You see, most people have been keeping quiet about this, and yet this is something that is vital for everybody, and most especially my constituents in Ikumi municipality. Yeah. One, I think this report will be an eye-opener to us as a country, because most people have been thinking everything is maybe okay, but I can tell you not everything is okay across the board. My sister talked about the issue of the impact of COVID-19, and I looked at what happened during those days. Food was an issue, for instance. And I saw people trying to get the 100,000 from OPM. But Uganda didn't have a social registry to show who actually was in need badly. It was an issue. Number two, you talked about the issue of basics in hospitals. Across the board, what I see in most of the public hospitals now, or healthcare facilities, is that people go for prescription. And then you are sent out to buy what? Your own medicine. That's what I'm seeing. Of course, we say thank you to God and government, because for you to get a person who gives you the proper and the right prescription is something, it's a plus. We are talking about no good public schools. The star schools of those days are no longer there. We see the buildings, but what comes out, we may not be able to equate it to what we have in the private sector. The ability to pay is not equally distributed across the country. The high debt, we are talking about now Uganda having a debt of around 92 plus trillion. And we are servicing that debt. So if we are servicing such a debt, how do we manage to ensure that we balance and give people the rights? Our constitution, according to chapter 4 of the constitution, is embedded with a lot of rights. The right to education, the right to maybe clean water. All those rights are there. But if you are to ask the question whether those rights have been observed keenly, there is still a big gap. So government has a lot to do. Look at the provision of food, nutrition, and early childhood, for instance, is an issue. And it has a big impact. If you don't attend to these babies of less than 1,000 days early in their childhood, it will have a big impact at their mature days. There is an issue of investing in the private sector. We've taken as a country that policy of liberalization of the economy, going private everywhere. I can cite one, the issue of privatizing the waters, I would say so. Where now we have soldiers saying everybody should vacate. There are people who were born next to the waters, and all of their life has been what? Around the waters. And when we say move away because we want to develop these factories which are going to supply fish overseas, you know that a human right is being broken. We are investing, but not adequately to the public service. That I must admit. We are giving little to public service. If you cite, for instance, UPE that we are talking about, how much money do we give per child to stay at school? Because government has not been able to give enough, you will find that some of these schools have also gone some way to ask parents that we need this for this, and that has kept away many out of school. For that reason, you'll see the impact of so much of teenage pregnancies leading to death, many dropouts, and so many, actually poverty, becoming a cycle that is planted. And you've talked about regulating the private sector. For instance, let me talk about this. Is it really proper for a doctor to work in a government hospital, but also have a private facility? When you sign a contract with government under public service, are supposed to give like, I think 8 days on average per day. But 8 hours. Is it true that our civil servants who are having private investments are giving all the hours to the public service? It is a big question that we need to answer as a country. Okay. And for me, that is something that needs attention. We should be asking the questions. Should we allow that? Or we should regulate, we should amend the laws to provide that if you're in a public service, you don't double stand. You don't go there and then be this way, because you will cause chaos. Okay. And there was an issue to do with accountability, and I think that is something very, very critical. Uganda collects taxes, but in the East Africa region, I belong to the East Africa Forum. Uganda is among the least collectors in terms of tax. Our tax to GDP, I think, is below 14% as we talk right now. Rwanda is way ahead of us. The issue is, before we even talk of how we spend the taxes, how many of our people are able to collect money to pay taxes. How many contribute to the tax base? It is a big thing. It is a big thing. Okay. How many are contributing to the tax base? And then we come back to that accountability. And why does government, for instance, borrow? Government borrows because the taxes are what? Are not enough. Okay. And the corruption is eating up on some of the what? Resources. And this has been a challenge. But what is government doing? Government works through arms of government. We have the judiciary, yes, we have parliament, and the executive is there. And for us, I think I should talk about parliament, because that's where I am. Parliament works through committees. And for your information and to the people out there, we have got a committee on human rights. We also have a committee on accountability. They are there actually, 4 of them. We have Park Central, Park Local Government. We have also a committee on government assurances and implementation. If you assure people, are you going to implement? Okay. And others. Okay. So my issue is government is trying its best to provide to the citizens. But what I see is that the provision is not yet adequate. It is still falling short. No wonder you can now see government trying to say, let us rationalize agencies. Let's bring UNRWA back. Let's bring REA was already removed from where it was, back to public, to Ministry of Energy. Those examples are there. Okay. Maybe that is to try to run away from bureaucracy. And why people run away from public service? That first of all, they feel that government is slow. It's so bureaucratic. Everything, let me first ask so and so, let's first get permission, let's first do this, we must follow all this for us to, and yet in the private sector you find that for you to survive, one, you need to be getting profit. For you to get a profit, you need to be having customers. For you to have customers, you should be controlling the share of the market. For you to control that market, you must satisfy people. So how do you satisfy people? Deliver timely, deliver quality, and do everything that the customer wants. And that's where government has failed. Okay. Government has failed to deliver quality, timely, at the right price.
Honorable, you highlighted the issue of the profit motive by the private actors. And so how then do we balance the profit motive and private entities with the human rights obligation of the state in providing public services? I'll have to pick Alana's mind on that.
Yes. I think the court decision that came out in January this year in the case of Happy VAG is very instructive, because the judge actually looks at it. He looks at even the existing regulatory regime, and he says there is an incompatibility here, right? That the state must be able to come in and rein. Yes, there are things you will do. Yes, like Grace says, the private sector complements, but there must be a red line. People in Uganda right now, if you owe me money, I cannot detain you in my house. Yeah. It will be a criminal offense. If you, if I decide that there is this one thing and I am not going to, say it's water, whatever it is that is very fundamental, and I come and I say, me, I want 1 billion. Grace, you want a drop of water? 1 billion. We shall see where else you get the water, right? There would be, there's certain things that are just, they even shock the conscience. So the judge says, I'm giving you for 2 years. He says, government, you must pass a law regulating. This year is ending. In typical fashion, I think we're waiting for the kavuyo of the last minute, and we do so. And it came from a substantial pain, but it's not just at Ugandan level. The African Commission, and for it was looking at the whole of Africa, it passed General Comment number 7 and said, even with private actors, there's a public function. The moment you step into healthcare, education, if you want to do what you want to go and deal with watches or whatever it is, some sort of luxury item. But when you come to these public services, there is a public function, and therefore there must be regulation to ensure availability, accessibility, quality, non-discrimination, and to make sure that what is there is democratically acceptable. I encourage everyone to read the General Comment, because the beauty about it was looking again, like I said, at the Africa level. Nikta asked a very important question. Where do we go from here? I can feel very confident and say, I may have money. It's a choice. I can walk to TMR. I met someone from a different country who talked about just this, and talked about the fact that his brother had no choice, and he was wealthy. So they asked him for titles of the best land. Not this one, I want this title, or want to give you oxygen. And that's how the guy died. But what if What if things are reversed? Those of us who have health insurance, we feel so cushioned. I can go to a private, it is fine. When COVID came, our health insurance said, here are some tips on avoiding COVID, and then you are on your own. You will have to pay. But what if I even, you know, life changes. Today you're up, tomorrow you're down.
Yeah.
So the most important thing is to think about what is the society you want to create.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that there are certain basics that will happen, such that if you are not in a position of authority, you are also okay. Your children are okay. Grace here, or many of us here, could be parents, right? So on the one hand, we can say, no to regulation. Then when the squeeze plate begins saying, but you people on this list, who determines that I have to pay for a trip to this place? You get why is that now mandatory as opposed to an option? And the areas where the private sector, because of the underfinancing, has become the alternative, like she said, it supplants. Why in Buyukwe, and we have a court case on detention, Buyukwe, a couple of places, the government says, okay, we won't put here a health facility of government, we're already here, we shall put some money. The facility detains. It is COVID, government is saying decongest. We begin getting calls, people are detained. We had to rescue a young girl, a young mother, she was below 18. They're detained in the facility. You don't figure out the food or any of that, and yet that is their alternative. Even getting them to speak out, they are truly terrified because that is their only alternative. And so I think it's very important that all stakeholders come and say yes. Okay. There must be a line in the sand we draw, because we should be fighting for a Uganda that works for all of us.
Okay. Thank you, Alana. I would like to bring Nikita in, to tell us, you know, with, you know, the commercialization of the public services comes, you know, effects or the impacts that it has on especially the youth and all the other marginalized groups. Could you mind highlighting some of these impacts that, you know, the commercialization of the public services has, especially on the youth and the people in the rural areas as well?
Yeah, so like I had said initially, that because of the cost of living, I cannot move out. It's simply expensive. Because I do not have medical insurance, I cannot leave my house. I cannot leave my parents' house, sorry. Yeah. Now, because of this commercialization, yeah, we are not able to get drugs. There are no health workers even in hospitals. So where is that leaving us as young people? Yeah. If I'm supposed to start on my career, if I'm supposed to be looking for a job and work, then now that I'm unemployed, where do I start from? If everything around me needs me to have to pull out money from my pocket and pay for it, where is that leaving me? That's how I'm being affected. If everything needs money, where am I left? Yeah, I felt that it's state's responsibility to look out for me. I thought it's state's responsibility to guide me. Like I said, work hard, get good grades, and get a good job.
Yes, you did also highlight that the young people want to be involved in, you know, these discussions.
Exactly,
and
yes.
we would like to know why. Why do you think it is important for the young person to also be, you know, involved in this discussion?
Why I think it's important is because we are the generation, sorry, we are the future, yeah? Today it's you, tomorrow it's us, yeah? These conversations, these discussions have been left to people older than us. They've been left to our leaders. But however, they are more contentious to us. That today, for example, this is going to go off the discussion, but today we're cutting trees, but I'm the one left to face the consequences about the swamps that have been drained, exactly, and all of that. These are very important discussions. Climate change, for example, is a very important discussion, but then, oh, we should leave that to developed countries. Oh, those are not our conversations. Now, we as young people, we as youth, have to be on these tables. We need our voices heard. We need people to know, we need our leaders to know that we are the ones that are going to be affected. And these are our views, these are our points, this is what we're saying.
Okay, thank you, Nikta. So I'd like to bring Grace in as a key coordinating player for the private sectors. What are some of the proactive measures that you have taken to ensure that private actors in the health are accessible, particularly those in resource-poor communities, also the youth inclusive? Yes.
I think, let me just take us a step back to the conversation that's been held, because I think it feeds into some of the solutions. The first thing I want to mention is maybe what Honorable mentioned about duality of practice. Duality of practice is where a government employee is also working in a private facility. And we need to ask ourselves why. Why is it necessary? Because most practice arises out of a need, a necessity, or a gap. Now, we know in this country we have a shortage of specialists. We simply do not have enough specialist human resources, especially in the health sector. And if we're to look at the human rights conversation, which is at the heart of what we're talking about today, we're talking about access. And if we say you can only access these specialists in one facility, we're going to talk about more overcrowding, and we're going to talk about lack of access, because it means where these specialists are moving to provide that care and service to different populations in different communities, they're no longer allowed. You have to come and line up behind the other thousands of people all week long. And then you also get the challenge of functionality of the services in that public facility. If we're to say specialists are tied to one facility, the fact is government does have constraints. It's not like they're not trying. But the fact is sometimes the machine is down. Sometimes they don't have the reagents, they've not stocked up. There's a whole manner of reasons why those services may not be available in that government facility at that particular time. And that's why the conversation about duality of practice requires us to have a broader lens and a deeper thought process around what is our national policy. Are we being relevant, or are we being protectionist to the detriment of the lowest income bracket in this country? The thing around regulation, and that's why I'm moving slow. I want us to talk to, because these are very key issues, and I agree with what the panelists are saying. The issue about regulation is not that this country doesn't have a regulatory framework for private sector. We do. We have acts, we have policies, and we have regulations in this country to regulate the private health sector. We even have authorities, buildings in place with hundreds of people scattered across the country whose job it is to supervise and regulate the private sector. We also have systems. In fact, the Uganda Healthcare Federation, in collaboration with the Ministry of Health, developed a digital platform to support supervised private health facilities. It's called the Self-Regulatory Quality Improvement System. That SQIS platform gives a quality improvement plan unique to each self-assessing facility. So the question is not around regulation. It is about scaling up what is in place and making it effective and impactful. And that is, again, an entire conversation. But I really wanted us to make sure that we all understand the point that this is a collaboration. Government can't do it alone, and private sector, we know, can't self-regulate in its entirety. So we need to collaborate, and we need to create a conducive environment for that to flourish. The issue of detention of patients, and I know secretly people want me to respond to that, so let me speak to it.
I like calling it secretly, yes. It is important. It is important because these are cases that actually happen.
I agree, and I am the first person that actually, when people were being detained, because I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen, it did.
And it does happen.
And I was getting phone calls that this person is at this facility, and I don't want us to paint all private sector with the same brush, is my point. It is not every single facility that is detaining patients. Like in any sector, you have pockets of people who do not follow the rules. Even driving in traffic. I know justices of the High Court that drive the wrong way on the traffic. They're driving the wrong way on the wrong side of the road. You'll all, with their sirens on, and lead cars. It happens. But I'm not going to say all justices of the High Court break the law. They don't. So the same thing with the private sector. Not everybody detains patients. And not everybody does the wrong thing. But the fact is that we need to make sure that we follow the law, and where it happens, we need to rain down hard, and we need to make sure people understand what the rules are. So the solution is really a multi-sectoral approach. And even us as private sector, we're talking to other sectors to say, what can you do to contribute to the solution? Because the health sector cannot do it alone. We need to talk to agriculture. We need to talk to gender. We need to talk to works. Because road traffic accidents are one of the biggest drivers of admissions in hospitals. What are we doing to make sure that people understand how to drive on the streets? People are doing it all over the world. Why is it in Uganda that people drive on the wrong side of the road and they think it's okay? Why is it in Uganda people ride bicycles at high speed on the pavement and nothing happens to them? They'll drive right past a policeman on the pavement. Why is it that it's okay in this country for that to happen? And I think John Mohozi, helped us at some point where he was positioned in different places and stopped it, and the sirens quietened down, driving on the wrong side of the road quietened down. In fact, we need him to start setting up permanent posts to stop this, because when he was there, it reduced. The point around a multi-sectoral approach is the solution to this conversation. And us as private sector, what we are doing, you will find that a number of non-health private sector and health private sector invest heavily in corporate social responsibility activities that are providing care in communities, and they're engaging the youth. Private Sector Foundation of Uganda has a GROW project that is in particular even looking at female youth, how to catalyze them to help them to grow into business. We also have the situation where we're looking at how do we make sure that in the health sector we catalyze and improve community health insurance, where for 20,000 a year, if we can get the parish development model and cooperatives in our communities to start pulling their little money, whatever they have together, to amplify. We have an organization called Health Partners that is doing a lot of work to train cooperatives to do more community health insurance, because government does not have enough money to provide the services, because they're going to come to the private sector for more taxes, and that is what I don't want. What I want is for us to use what we have more efficiently for more effective health service provision.
Okay, Grace, you did highlight the issue of a multi-sectoral approach, and that being said, we cannot leave out the human rights defenders, and I'd like Alana to respond to this on what role should the human rights defenders and advocates play in ensuring that the marginalized groups are not left behind in terms of, you know, access to public services.
I think when you talk about a multi-sectoral approach, General Comment 7 of the African Commission actually talks about the responsibilities of the different stakeholders. It's good to hear they are trying to self-regulate, and there are limits to that, and you must be telling your facilities to get in line. But there was a way the judiciary could have told these people stop driving, but then we had a General Muhoozi come, and also there's the law, which I think in this country we like to think is a suggestion. It is not a suggestion. Detention is against the law. You cannot detain people. It's like me beating people up and then I go to church and I give some money. I've given you some donations as a community to contribute towards your school. No, you can give all the donations you want, but follow the law. Do what you're supposed to do. And so I think government must regulate. In terms of getting back to human rights defenders, one of the things we have always said is, one, for us to document. And we go to court. And right now we're in a spate of court cases. Even public finances, we believe, are being played around with, like in Luowa International Specialized Hospital. We are now at the Supreme Court. That's where we have, that's where the appeal has reached. But I think that we need to get very, very, very serious, because we have to define the country we are going to live for our children. You go to other, there are other countries where, I lived abroad for a number of years, and the first time I got sick, I was rushed to a facility. I was treated. The issue of the payment or whatever it is, I remember I got out and I still had some money that I owed. You people, if they were doing Ugandan style, I would have been detained, I would not be in school, they would not get their money. It would be a fail for everyone. Because in certain countries they have said no. There must be certain laws and rules that govern. And so it's very important that we are regulating any actor that comes into this space to say, this is where the line stops. And of course we'll hear, are there other ways to recover? Yes. We are doing it even for tenants with rent. Now the Landlord-Tenant Act says I can't do certain things, even though I get chamucated in my head. I must begin to. Because we're saying when it comes to certain things, there are certain things that are fundamental rights. We cannot forget that. I think it's very, very important. And it's not just human rights defenders. I think all Ugandans must wake up and demand for public services. Private sector or not, it is as you all also when we're in the fight for public services. Okay. And we must demand it as a right, because every Ugandan, you pay tax. From the moment you wake up in this country, you may be paying it directly or consuming it, but you are paying tax. And you're not the only ones where, in terms of pandemics, and we have to talk about certain areas, you talked about monkeypox or COVID, we have to take those lessons from those areas. It cannot be business as usual. As usual. Yes. In other countries like Italy, they'll be able to say we are even commandeering these beds, because we must save life. The right to life is a fundamental right. When you deprive me access to oxygen, because I must pay this, I must give a title, it's a fundamental right. It is not just regardless of who the whatever it. We're now talking about certain things that are very important, and so we must begin to make that distinction very, very clear. And the state, and I'm glad Parliament is here, must be at the center of that, because the reality is, if if everyone does what they feel and what, then there's anarchy. In Uganda right now, I can't walk around, I can't come here unrest. I will be in violation of some laws. There are laws that govern how we must act in a society, and they are meant to safeguard a public good.
Thank you, Alana.
And so that must be made very clear.
I'll give Honorable a minute or two to just respond to some of the deliberations you've had, because everything seems to be pointing to government.
Yes, and I want to start with the one that she ended with. And I think really the best thing we need to do is to just stop privatization of certain sectors.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm being radical to a certain extent. Specifically health.
Yes.
I should have cited out that one. We should remove it from private hands. If the private sector is there, let it be there up to a certain degree, but not be the one controlling. Let government deliberately invest in what? Health. I'm happy. Recently, government started putting something in the hospitals. For instance, buying ambulances. The ones which are acceptable of a certain standard, putting in the constituencies. Because MPs were now buying minibuses.
Yeah.
We are buying anything and we call it what?
An ambulance. Put there.
So I think we should have a deliberate effort as a country to identify critical sectors that should be in the hands of what? Government. Because if we are talking about the right to life, who is that person who is responsible for the life of the citizens and property? It is the government. Now, if we go to private sector and a private person is saying that you must first give me your land title before I give you oxygen, for them to a certain extent they have a right to claim for that, because they are also using money to buy the what? The oxygen. So the best thing we can do is to ask the government, we as parliament actually should start this and say government should put money in health. Oxygen must be there. Let us not look at the private sector, because if you look at the private sector, you're already trying to create imbalances. The rich will get support, the poor will die. And they die earlier. So for me, that is something that we must look at. Okay. We have talked about the issue of the youth and how they are being treated. For me, I have a concern. First of all, when it comes to elections, for instance, there's something that you have not talked about: commercialization of politics. How do you participate when you don't have the money? However much you are tall and your mouth can speak wider and people can hear, they will hear but they will not vote for you because they are asking first, what do you have? So it is a problem. So to create that balance and balance the both, even the politics has to be de-commercialized so that we are somewhere.
Okay.
Education of today, UPE, we need to invest heavily and withdraw the hands of private sector from, because now those who have the money will take the children to certain schools, and those who get the first grades are the ones in the private sector. When it comes to employment, it will follow the same route. At the end of the day, poverty will follow those who went to public what? Schools.
Yeah.
And it will be a vicious cycle, and you will trace and you will find that it is true. You fly in an helicopter and you will see poverty in the public areas.
Okay.
And those who are in the private sector, they are okay. They are making profits, and even when it comes to flying in a plane, those in the private fly business class. For us in the UPE arrangement, you'll have to be in the economy. You sit on the last seat of the plane.
I would like to bring Grace in economy class.
There's nothing wrong with flying economy, but
I know.
Let's not go down that road.
You may
fly economy. You still get food.
Give me 1 second.
You still have a stewardess.
Give me 1 second. You may say so, but one day you'll have a long trip, a long flight. That will take you like 9 plus or 10 or 18 hours. Okay. That's when you will know
that economy is uncomfortable.
That the economy is not the best.
I'd like to bring Grace.
Yeah, because I won't talk about the time I've taken a 14-hour flight in economy. I will jump to the issue of
Honorable saying, you know, the health sector should be brought back to the state and no private actors involved because of the issue of the inequality in terms of access to these services.
And the people who are supposed to enforce are the ones who are perpetuating these inequalities.
Okay.
Yeah. They enforce us to be. They are not helping us.
Yeah, I find it interesting, though, Honorable, that you're saying that because you are government and it is your colleagues that you sit with that are having these discussions. You own the most facilities of a tertiary level in this country. You're the biggest importers of drugs. You're the biggest spenders in health. So it's an interesting conversation for me to be a part of, especially from that perspective. But Maybe if we look at it also from a more simplistic point of view, that if the government of Uganda for public facilities is struggling to make sure that shelves have essential drugs, that family planning commodities are on the shelves when a woman needs them to be there. If we're saying that we need to re-examine the expenditure and planning on the health system in our country, that is not something that I, as Uganda Healthcare Federation, can influence. I don't plan to stand for parliament. I'm happy to advise in the conversations that we have. We have a public-private partnership technical working group that meets monthly, where we give policy input and guidance and advice. It can't all be taken, to be honest, because of the simple fact there are also constraints in that area. But at the same time, if I talk as Grace, I cannot tell Alana, because I am spending 20 million on chicken in my house, you're not allowed to spend your 3 million on beans in your house. I can't tell another partner that is also doing something, because I choose not to be efficient in my house. I don't want you to do it. I don't think that is right. Okay. You know, I had a conversation with somebody in Kenya actually, just as recently last year. They said, yes, but you see this conversation, it's like saying, because I can't get sausages in my house, you shouldn't buy them for your family also. No. It is about how do we re-examine our allocation of the meager resources that we have. How do we mobilize domestic resources to be more efficient and more efficiently allocated? How do we prioritize our expenditure in health? And that is what the private sector does, to be able to get that margin that we're all very upset about, that is called profit. And that profit is what allows us to buy the most latest technology and bring it and have a cath lab and have all this expertise and send our nurses to learn how to be the best that they can be to care for our patients. That is what we do with our surplus. Okay. So I feel that the recommendations, if you look at the recommendations in this report, they center around a couple of things. They center around government taking the lead. And I feel that as a player in the health system, I feel the government really actually, maybe because I'm on the private sector side, I feel that government is pretty dominant in the health sector. They make the decisions, they spend the most, they basically, allegedly, according to DHIS 2, also see the most patients.
And the services?
That is not for me to speak to, but from what I see, when we're talking about leadership, you're not talking about this, you're talking about all those other issues that I've mentioned. The report also talks about making sure that the private sector is regulated. I've talked about the regulatory framework that already exists, and maybe it can be funded better. Maybe it can be more efficient, but we're working on that. In fact, those councils are being amalgamated into a single authority for more cost efficiency, yes, and for reducing the duplication in the supervision of private sector. Right. Yeah. So, and then lastly, if in that report, it also talks about making sure that if you look at all the court cases that have been happening, it's talking about making sure that you apply the law. We're not against the law. Where actually it works for us as private sector, because we're making sure that we're trying to meet an international standard. People keep saying that if we produce more domestically, the cost of care will go down. It won't. It won't. Because we have to meet a standard. We have to import a lot of the inputs that are required for manufacture. We have to make sure our people are trained. These youth that we're talking about, are they at a standard that we can train them to be able to do what we need them for that more local production? Okay. So when we talk about human capital development and making sure we're prepared for the future of this continent, for the geopolitics gravitation towards making sure that Africa is more self-sustaining, these are conversations that are beyond health, okay, that are not just about private sector. It's a multi-sectoral conversation, and it's a conversation that needs to be happening more prominently in our day-to-day politics.
Thank you, Grace. And you did talk about the future, highlighted the future outlook. And I'd like to bring in Alana on this as we also get to look at some of the recommendations that are in the report. What does the future hold for the provision of public services in East Africa as a general? Do you foresee a shift back towards greater public sector involvement, or will the commercialization continue to grow?
I think the future depends on the decisions we make today. And I'm very worried. I'm worried that we are hurling towards a cliff, and COVID was this sort of like barrier that say, people, you're going towards a cliff, and we are still failing to learn. Because if we were learning, there would be no longer debate about this. Because the facts are not contested. What we've now begun to say is, do we need to do this now, yes or no? You understand? We need to invest in public services. Otherwise, we are doomed. Number two, we need to make sure that it is clear that we are safeguarding the rights of our people. You can talk about sufficiency of regulation, and Justice Odoki looked at the regulation and said, where does the person fall in this? Because you don't personally agree with special detention, but even those that are receiving money from, I don't know, IFC and so forth, trying to meet whatever international standards, are still doing that, and some of them are very powerful players in this country. So if we want to be able to make sure we are going for a Uganda that works for us, that is supposed to really make sure that we are developing and there is inclusive growth trickling down to the person deep down in Rakai or Mitoma or Kayunga or whatever, we must begin to have these conversations now and redefine it. Okay. That includes amending the law, that includes cutting the wasteful expenditure and actually putting money there, and that includes setting clear rules of engagement and saying, when it comes to certain areas, this government regulates us on all kinds of things.
Okay.
Why is it not touching sufficiently the ills that we have seen that come up in the care of the healthcare? Because like she said, the people who will always try to take advantage. No one likes to be regulated. I hate being regulated, but you do it to make sure that you're safeguarding the rights of others, and there is law and order. And I think we need to really get back. I encourage everyone to really come to the to question why is Africa, other continents are investing. That's what they have learned from COVID. For us, we want to continue underinvest in education, yet we expect to have a workforce of the future. Yet we expect to develop. Why is Africa not getting the lessons right now? And this discussion should move beyond where we sit in our professional institutions, because of course we have to argue from where we sit, and actually speak to each other as Africans and say, what is the Africa we want?
Okay, thank you, Alana.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid time is not on our side, but I'm going to ask each of us to use 1 minute to give us their closing remarks, and I'll start with you, Honorable. As in your closing remarks, what structural policy initiatives is the state implementing to ensure that public money works for the people and not for, you know, their private interests? Something that all the panelists have actually highlighted, and Alana did give an example of the issue of Lubowa Hospital. Yes, we all know what happened there. Billions of money in a ghost project. So, Honorable, as you give your closing remarks in 1 minute.
Yes, I see, first of all, government is really intensifying the fight against corruption, because most of the things that we're talking about, in my personal opinion and view, most of the things are connected to individual person's appetite for money. And they are telling government, let's invest in this because they want to gain from there. And then they run away with what is supposed to be for the people. So I think government is doing its best to close that gap, but also rationalizing agencies, making sure that we even reduce on the bureaucracy, duplication, so that we make it better for the people. So let us make it a people-centered approach if we want to see a better Uganda.
Okay, thank you, Honorable. On to Alana. What would be your closing remarks?
I now want to speak to the donors, because he who controls the money gets the things done. When you come like the World Bank did, and you said, go with public-private partnerships, are you looking at actually the needs of Uganda? Which public-private partnership in health invested in has come and is substantially changing lives on the ground for the most vulnerable? Is that in line with your mantra, for example, as the World Bank? What are the public-private partnerships we are seeing? They are drains on the public purse. Those of you who should check out our publication, for example, on Lubowa, and you track what the implication it is going to be by the time that thing is done on our public purse, and what it could have done for our public health system. So donors, when you come in, and you're coming in to complement the government's financing, let us invest in our public health facilities, in our public schools, so that the everyday Ugandan can actually benefit. And I think it's very important that point is made clear, because we sometimes forget that there is government, there are donors, there is the private sector, there is everyone else. We should really be working for a Uganda and an Africa that works for all. The Africa we want is one where everyone can get healthcare, education, regardless of ability to pay.
Thank you. Thank you, Alana. Grace, what will be your closing remarks?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to help clarify on that the World Bank, actually the PPPs in health don't exist for World Bank. The PPPs that World Bank has invested in this country are roads. They've invested in roads. The road infrastructure we're seeing, that's World Bank money. Now, they've also invested in helpful results-based financing, where they pay for results. Lubowa is another monkey altogether. I won't get into that, but I know World Bank, at least RBF, there's no documented PPP for health funded by the World Bank, but around global health security and outbreak preparedness. That's one thing that I think we learned as the private sector. We've been engaging with Dr. Chobe, the incident commander. We've been putting things in place. We've been talking about monkeypox. He's helping us come up with some communication strategies to mitigate spread. So we have learned the lesson as the private sector. We've started to put in infrastructure and investments that would help us prepare for any future outbreaks. We've invested in technology and more screening machinery around that. But more money, the message I want to put out there is more money doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get better results. If all of you can just Google, even just yesterday, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, has said they have had record investment in the NHS, and they have the worst results ever. So it's something that we need to think about as a country, that throwing money there may not be the answer, but making the money work harder is the answer.
Thank you so much, Grace. On to Nikta. What will be your closing remarks in a minute?
Okay. As youth, we feel like we are politically marginalized when it comes to decisions that are concerning public services. We feel that a lot has been said. We feel that government is pushing and people are saying things, but our voices are not heard. This is why, sadly, we're taking it to the streets. This is why tomorrow you'll find a graduate in the gown with a shutout saying that they're looking for a job. It's quite sad, but we need to be included in these discussions because it's us that they're affecting. We are the future. So all the noise that is happening is really for us.
Okay.
So do include us in this.
All right. Thank you so much, my panelists. Alena Kembabazi from ISA Uganda, Grace Chiwanuka, the Executive Director of Uganda Healthcare Federation, and the Honorable Aogon Silas, Member of Parliament, Kume Municipality, as well as Nikta Kawese, representing the student and the youth. And the conversation has been on the human rights impact of commercialization of public services in East Africa as a region. And your takeaway here should be that you have a right to these public services, and therefore you should not keep quiet, you should speak up. Thank you so much for joining in. I'm Mildred Pedun. Have yourselves a lovely afternoon.